Welcome to a theological dust-up hosted by Freethinking Ministries. I'm Dr. Tim Stratton, and today we're going to be discussing an objection raised against the knowledge of God, as the Apostle Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 10:5, that falls under the banner of something known as the problem of evil. Now, interestingly, I've spilled much ink solving the problems of evil from a Molinist perspective. Indeed, in the final chapter of my book, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism, I offer several arguments that seem to destroy, as the Apostle Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 10:5, that would destroy the problems of moral and natural evil. And I've recently finished a paper demonstrating how Molinism solves the problem of divine hiddenness offered by the likes of John Schellenberg. In fact, I'll be reading this paper at the next EPS conference, and this paper is being published in a journal next year. Now, trust me, we're going to be talking about the so-called problem of divine hiddenness much more in the near future. But today we're going to be discussing a different problem of evil, the problem of animal pain and suffering. Now, I've spent time discussing the problem of animal pain on my website, but I recently watched a video by Lukas Rueegger on his YouTube channel called Deflate, and it really got my attention because he raised some points that I'd not previously thought about. So I asked Lukas if he would be willing to join us today to discuss his response in more detail. So with that said, please welcome Lukas Rueegger to the show. Hey, what's up, Lukas?
Hey, Tim. Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you again. Time you were on my channel.
The last time we were together, I was on your show. So
That's
now
right.
It's time for you to be on my show, and I'm just honored. I've really been enjoying your work, and you're killing it on YouTube, man. So keep it up. Hey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. So my name is Lukas. I'm 38 years old, married with 3 young kids, and we're originally from Switzerland, but we've lived in Beirut, Lebanon for the past 9.5 years, where we do ministry to what we call the secularized Arab youth. So people who have, very much the mindset that you would find in the West as well, relativists, people who, want to, believe in scientism and think that science is the highest standard of all knowledge. People who are very anti-religion, anti-institution. We've been running Bible study for skeptics in a cafe that attracts some 20 people every week. We do discussion circles with atheist clubs, and we've done debates. And recently I started my YouTube channel around a year ago, and this has been it's been a good journey so far.
Wow. Now, you're a graduate from Biola University as well, right?
That's right.
All right. So we're fellow Biola Eagles. We just barely missed each other, I think.
That's right.
So it's good to get to know you now. So, let's get down to business. A well-known YouTube atheist known as the CosmicSkeptic. His name is Alex. What's his last name again?
Alex O'Connor.
O'Connor. I knew that. It just slipped my mind.
Sure.
So he's known as the CosmicSkeptic, and he recently made a video stating that he thinks that the greatest problem for the Christian view of God is that animals experience so much pain and that they suffer horrendously. In fact, I believe that he claims that animal life is defined by pain.
That's right.
But so what I found interesting and fascinating is that he doesn't seem to think that the problem of moral evil or natural evil or gratuitous evil or even the problem of divine hiddenness are the big problems for Christianity. And in fact, I agree, and I've written a lot about that. But he thinks that animal pain and suffering is the biggest problem facing Christianity, at least if Christians believe that God is a maximally great being. And of course, I do argue that God is a maximally great being. I spend so much time and spill so much ink talking about how God is a maximally great being. So if the cosmic skeptic is correct, then that is a threat against my view of God. So, Lukas, can you tell our audience maybe a little bit more about Alex, the cosmic skeptic, and also unpack his argument for us. What is his argument raised against the knowledge of God, as the Apostle Paul would say?
Yeah. So Alex O'Connor is arguably the most well-known or most respected atheist YouTuber. I think he started out some 5 or 6 years ago at the age of 16 or 17. And really, like the first, couple of videos, for a long time, the stuff he put out was, not really, in my opinion, not like deeply thought through philosophically, but he's become a student at Oxford, double majoring in philosophy and theology. And he has really stepped up his game in presenting, arguments that are far more solid than what you get to see from other atheist YouTubers. And I also believe that he's become far more open to Christian theism. Had a while ago, he had a conversation with William Lane Craig on the Kalam cosmological argument. And, I was personally moved by that conversation. Alex himself admitted that his key objection against the Kalam is actually not that good or not that strong. And after the conversation, I saw Dr. Craig put up a Facebook post saying that he really enjoyed this conversation and that he thinks that Alex is very smart and a very humble and genuine guy. And that really moved me. I've seen other videos by Alex where he wrestles with the problem of, or the challenge of giving to charity. And, should you sell all your possessions to alleviate pain for other people? And that moved me because I felt like, well, this guy, he's really serious. He doesn't just talk the talk, but he kind of wants to walk the walk as well. Right. So that's a bit of my kind of background story with CosmicSkeptic. He's got some 420,000 subscribers probably. Wow. And as far as his case against Christianity is concerned, the case against animal suffering, he does claim that this is the biggest problem for Christianity, even bigger than the problem of human suffering. And well, one thing to know about Alex is that he became a vegan around 2 years ago, maybe. And so here's something I think we all need to be aware of. This is something that is not just a philosophical case for Alex. This is something that really bothers him, that animals suffer pain. And there's a real personal dimension to that argument. It's not just, him, trying to put up a cool case, from a pure philosophical angle. This is a personal thing for him. And this ought to be taken seriously. Yeah. Now, his case is this. He says that given that there are far more animals living on planet Earth than there are humans, and given that there is so much pain and seemingly gratuitous pain that animals have to go through, it is very hard for the Christian to make the case that an all-loving and all-powerful God exists. Because again, when you compare, the sheer amount of animals you have and the amount of humans that live, there's just far more animals, and their suffering, amounts to a far greater degree, or just kind of turns out to be far greater than what we as human beings get to suffer. And so, that's how he lays it out. And as you say, I do believe that he overstates his case, or that his case is kind of an emotional appeal that builds and depends on a picture of sentient existence or a picture of animal existence that is just too far-fetched and too exaggerated. Again, he says that animal life is defined by pain. So he's basically saying to be an animal is to be in pain. He also mentions that animals are endlessly tormented, which is simply not true. So, and that's kind of where I pick up my case against him.
Yeah. Well, I can completely resonate with him, I guess, or empathize with him, because I consider myself to be an animal lover as well. I deeply care about animals, always have since I was a little kid. I remember being a really little kid and being traumatized because I saw a documentary on HBO, I think, where these hunters would go kill these baby seals to get their pelts, and it just traumatized me. And I used to have daydreams of going and hunting the hunters because I was so like, those guys are pure evil. How can they do that? And so I do care about animals, and I've thought a lot about the problem of animal pain. Maybe not as much as I do, as much as I've dwelt upon the problems of moral and natural evil, but this is something that I've wrestled with. So I'm really looking forward to this, the rest of this conversation today. So anyway, you've kind of laid out Alex's case. So once again, as the Apostle Paul would say, well, how do you destroy the objection raised against the knowledge of God here?
Yeah. Well, the route I took in my first response, and I have a second response coming up against that case, but the route I took in my initial response is that I'm making the case that evolution will actually produce animals that are happy. So if you argue from evolutionary theory, and Alex does hold to evolutionary theory as the accurate description of the origin of species, then, I mean, simply put, the case is this. It is for the psychological state, so to speak, that is most conducive for survival, to survival for an animal, is a state of happiness rather than a state of, being constantly terrified and living in fear from predators or whatever could happen. And so I'm saying, depending on like a scientist or like one article in particular, I'm saying that Alex's case really doesn't hold up, or it actually contradicts evolutionary theory, in that evolutionary theory would tell us that, again, the animals that survive, or that animals make it in the struggle for survival, are animals that are mainly happy or mostly happy. And so that's kind of what I pitch against Alex, in saying that, well, you hold to evolutionary theory, and if that's the case, then you have to contend with the fact that, animals that come out, like animals that are produced in the struggle for survival, are animals that are mainly happy, which means that they, even if they are suffering, well, it doesn't mean that they're, tormented or constantly terrified and whatnot. So they just like humans, they experience some pain and suffering, but most of the time life's pretty good. In fact, you quote a scholar, I can't remember the scholar's name, but it said that he wrote an article, I think, or a paper saying animals are mostly happy most of the time, or something like that. That's right. Animals are happy most of the time. That's right. Yeah.
What was his name?
That's the interesting thing. He's called Martin Balluch. He's an Austrian. So he's got like 4 PhDs in the sciences, and one of his, or I can't remember, one of his PhDs anyways is in the philosophy of animal rights, and he is one of the most prominent animal rights activists in Europe, in the German-speaking world. So I thought that was interesting, referencing him, given that he is, like Alex, an animal rights activist. Yeah.
So I live in the middle of nowhere, in a state called Nebraska, and so I do get to see wild animals quite often, and it's a very rare thing when you see one suffering, and it's when you see an animal suffering that I believe we're called to help them. Actually, in fact, I taught my son at a young age that if he sees an animal in pain, he should try to help it. And in fact, even when he was really little, I remember he found some earthworms, and he was taking the earthworms and pulling them apart, or he'd take them and he'd start slamming them. And I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Don't do that. He was just a little kid. And I said, hey, and he goes, well, Dad, they don't feel anything. I'm like, well, maybe not. I don't know. I ask him and I don't get a clear answer, but I said, but this is God's creation. And I said, you need to take care of them. You need to And he's like, but Dad, we feed them to the fish when we go fishing. I'm like, yeah, but that's for a purpose, right?
That's right.
And so if it's for no purpose, then you treat them kindly, and you care for God's creation. But it's in fact, it's heartbreaking for me when I see, I think not too long ago, a bird fell out of the tree, a baby bird, and its wings were broken. It was obvious, and just was in pain. And and my son asked, well, what are we going to do? And I'm like, well, we have to kill it. But it just broke my heart to do so. I hate it, but I felt like it was the right thing to do at that time. My point is, gosh, every sentient being is going to experience some pain. In fact, Paul in 2 Corinthians 4:17, he tells us that these light momentary afflictions prepare us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So at least as far as humans go, maybe this is applied to the animal kingdom. And I kind of think it might be. I hope it is. I mean, maybe it's because I've watched too much Narnia or read too many Narnia books, but I believe that the new heavens and new earth are going to be filled with animals as well. I think we can actually make a strong case for that. And I don't see why it can't be the animals that are here now. Now, that's going to raise so many questions. But J.P. Moreland, who is a professor at Biola, he believes that animals have souls. He's made a case for that. And now he qualifies a few things. But I've talked to him personally about it and just said, well, hey, is it even, if it's, since you believe that animals have souls, is it possible, even if you don't think they do, is it possible that they can survive the death of their bodies and have an afterlife as well? And he goes, well, sure, it's possible. So that just opens up a whole new world and many more conversations when it comes to the problem of animal suffering. And maybe we can get into that a little bit more. But is there anything else that you'd like to say? I mean, I'll just say this. In your video responding to Alex, I loved how you showed all these pictures of animals in the wild, just having a blast, having so much fun. Some animals that really look like they're smiling. I mean, that was, and also that you were sharing a video of you and your son together, and pointing out how your son loves animals as well. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, my point was, just to kind of apply a bit of sarcasm there. And I know that, because I really believe, I mean, if you watch Alex's video, he just goes far beyond, what is actually real and what is actually true. And I believe he does. I mean, he's a good communicator. He knows how to speak and how to get his message across. But I believe him to be making an overly emotional case. Again, you cannot, to say that animal life is defined by pain, that's just, no biologist would sign off on that. That just doesn't fly. But so I believe that he needs to, paint such a dramatic picture in order to state a strong case. And I also believe that, it's not just that he's kind of intentionally trying to deceive people, but again, this goes back to his, this is a personal thing for him. He really, I believe he suffers because of the fact that animals suffer. And I mean, that's I kind of, I'm not, I mean, the Swiss are not exactly known for a good sense of humor, so I had to push myself to kind of, to drop a bit of sarcasm there. I got a bit of pushback from some viewers. They say, well, this is not serious. You think that because you're showing a bit of footage of bears that play out in the green, that the animals are all happy and whatnot. But I mean, some people got really angry. But I believe that Alex, who is who has a great sense of sarcasm, I think, I believe that he's probably gotten my point there. So yeah.
Well, that's the you got to have some fun.
That's right.
Even when I can think of one scholar who doesn't like anything that I've argued for, and he's written. He's a fellow Christian. He's just a Calvinist who doesn't like Molinism, but he's written it a lot against me, and his stuff is dripping with sarcasm at times, and I laugh out loud when I read it. if you can't take some sarcasm, then you shouldn't be in the field of arguing with each other. There's probably a line that we shouldn't cross, but I can appreciate a little helping of sarcasm, and I think it lightens the mood a little bit as well. So, I mean, you did make a point. It was slightly sarcastic, but it did make a point when you showed, look, this is the animal kingdom in the wild, and they are having fun. They're playing, they're experiencing pleasure. And it seems to follow from, like you said, evolutionary theory as well. Now, if I'm correct, you don't hold to evolutionary theory. Is that right?
No, I don't. And I made a pinned comment under my video saying that whereas I don't hold to evolutionary theory, but rather, believe in intelligent design, Alex holds to evolutionary theory, and my rejection of neo-Darwinism and support for intelligent design does nothing to undermine my case, because again, I'm arguing purely on Alex's turf. So,
Well, I'll just add this. You might find this interesting. I don't affirm evolution from a single-celled common ancestor, but in the last chapter of my book, I show how it's possible and compatible with a creation account in Genesis, even with a historical and literal Adam and Eve. And I show that if Molinism is true, then God can create via intelligent design through the initial conditions of the Big Bang and get everything to happen naturalistically, just the way he wants to. So the Christian doesn't have to be opposed to evolution, but we do have to be opposed to naturalistic evolution, and we can still affirm intelligent design. In fact, I do. So in fact, I've called this the intelligent design of evolution. But again, I don't say that it's true. I just offer a model and say, well, look, it could be true. So, if they dig up all the transitionary fossils tomorrow, does absolutely nothing to my faith or to my system of belief. So
that's right.
But anyway, that's kind of a side note. Do you want to talk a little bit more about either what you had in the video or what we can expect to see in your upcoming response?
Yeah, maybe, one thing I wanted to mention is, again, and this is something I will mention in my upcoming response, is the following. So again, Alex says that animal life is defined by pain. Now, what is interesting, and I haven't seen William Lane Craig picking this up, but I've done some research, and what we find is the following: 95% of the animal kingdom is invertebrate animals. That is, animals who don't have a vertebrate column or a spine. Yeah. So 95% or possibly even more are invertebrates. That are, under this category fall all insects, all spiders, jellyfish, like snails, and what have you. Now, there is a huge...
I just got to interrupt. Do spiders count as animals? Because I thought they were always demons from the pit of hell. That's what I think about spiders.
Well, actually, they're animal demons, from the pit of hell.
All right, sorry to interject.
Don't worry. Now, so here's the thing to know. Like among biologists and also neuroscientists, even there's a huge discussion going on about whether invertebrate animals can feel pain. And if invertebrate animals specifically, because the case for vertebrate animals, which includes all mammals, it seems to be more clear cut that they most probably feel some sort of pain. But what is hugely contested and debated and discussed is the question whether, again, 95% of all animals, all invertebrates, can actually feel pain, and if yes, if they do the same way that we experience pain. And so it seems to me that, we're talking not just about 50 or 60% of all animals, we're talking about almost all animals about which we don't even know whether they can feel pain. And now what I'm saying is this: I'm not making the case that these 95% of all animals, they definitely don't experience pain with that. But what I'm saying is this: given that the scientific conversation is where is at this point, it just seems to be far too overconfident to say that, well, animal life is defined by pain. It's just you just can't go there if you want to take the scientific conversation seriously. And so that's something I'm going to be adding to my second response to CosmicSkeptic there. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Now, that reminds me, some have argued, in fact, I think even William Lane Craig has at least posited this. I don't know if he affirms it, but he at least offers it as a possibility that almost all animals, I mean, you just talk about the 95% of the invertebrates, but
yes,
I think almost all animals, it might be the case that animals don't experience the kind of pain. In fact, I don't think this would be too much of a stretch here to say that almost all animals don't experience the kind of pain that humans experience when we experience pain. And so that is to say that animals don't know that they are in fact experiencing pain when they are in pain. Like you and I, when we're in pain, they don't experience it the same way. Now if that's even possible, then Alex's objection doesn't have much traction, or so it seems to me. And in fact, at the EPS conference a couple years ago, I think his name is Michael Murray. I met him. He wrote a book called Nature Red and Tooth and Claw, and this is what he's arguing for, if memory serves. So there's some literature in the field that it's not just talking about the 95% of invertebrates. It's saying that almost all animals, if not all of them, do not experience pain the way humans do. So what would you say about that?
I mean, I've seen William Lane Craig, arguing along these lines now, and Alex, CosmicSkeptic, has pushed back against it. Now, I think, I mean, he says, well, this is just, this is not kind of serious. Well, I don't know. No, he wouldn't call it non-serious scholarship, but he has his problems with it. So I believe we don't need to go where William Lane Craig goes, in the sense that we don't need to make the case and say that, scientific research suggests that animals may not be experiencing the kind of pain that human beings experience. Again, I'm not going that far. I'm making more I'm picking up the uncertainty that, is present among scientists with regards to the question of whether animals experience pain. Again, specifically when it comes to the 95% of the invertebrates. And rather than saying, well, it seems that they don't experience pain, I'm simply saying, we really don't know. And the scientists themselves don't know. So surely it is, to overstate your case, and it is not warranted when you say that animals, are defined by pain. That's all I'm building a counter argument against Alex from, again, it's more based on kind of epistemically rooted in the uncertainty we're facing in the field, and saying, well, Alex, you really can't build such a kind of overconfident case, given that scientists don't even know how pain looks like in the animal kingdom, and whether, again, at least 95% of the animals even experience pain. So let's, given that there's a question mark, let's take things a bit, more slowly and, with less ambition. Yeah,
that's a great point. You're really making quite a humble case. You're not trying to take such a make such a in your face strong case, I guess. But I have you make a great point, though, that scientists aren't really sure about this. And I did speak to a local neuroscientist, and I ran this by this person, and I said, do you think animals experience pain the same way that humans do? And she right away said, oh, no, not at all. Their brains aren't developed the way ours are, and the center of the brain that makes pain really bad for us. Animals don't seem to have, according to her. Now, I just have to take her at face value. She started talking about prefrontal cortex and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Bottom line, the jury's still out. And
that's right.
We have a lot to find out. So since the jury's still out, we can't leap to any conclusions right now.
That's right.
But I think for the sake of argument, we can grant some stuff and see how far it goes. Now, personally, if I were to bet money right now, I don't think animals experience pain as bad as humans do. When we could have the same kinds of injuries, and it would be much worse for humans, I think. But I can't prove it. That's just my hunch. But for the sake of argument, let's grant it and see what happens and how far it'll go. So I don't know. I've spent a lot of time writing about how pain, evil, and suffering and affliction prepares us for eternity, prepares us for heaven. I mentioned this earlier. I referenced the words of Paul in 2 Corinthians 4:17. I'll say it again. It says, "These light momentary afflictions prepare us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison." So, I read that so many times, but a few years ago, I read it and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, wow, what does this mean? How does it prepare us? Paul is saying that pain and suffering, all kinds of affliction, and really anything you could think of that you don't like about this world, whether it be moral evil, or because Paul he provides a whole list of all the pain, evil, and suffering that he's experienced. And now he's saying all this stuff prepares us for heaven, prepares us for eternity. So everything that we don't like about this world prepares us for heaven. Now, I think it works that way so that we don't take a perfect state of affairs for granted in the presence of an unhidden God, right? We won't take that state of affairs for granted. Unlike Adam and Eve and Satan and a third of all the angels, if Christianity is true, all these folks took a pain and suffering free state of affairs in the presence of an unhidden God for granted, and they wrecked it. So now I think any bad thing that we can think about, anything that we don't like about this world, even the fact that there might be suffering animals on the other side of the planet that you don't know about. Well, if you don't like that, then, gosh, that's preparing you for a state of affairs and where there's no suffering, including the animals. And it might just be the same animals that were suffering here on Earth that are not suffering for eternity. So, one thing I've said, and I've made it clear that with Molinism in mind, that this imperfect world could be the best feasible freedom permitting circumstance that God could create. Right? It could be the best feasible freedom permitting circumstance that God could create. Now, this isn't to be confused with the greatest of all possible worlds. That's a much different thing. I'm simply discussing the best of all freedom permitting circumstances, the best of all feasible freedom permitting circumstances. So now, of course, this would be after God takes account of all the moral, natural, and gratuitous evils, along with levels of divine hiddenness, and all while keeping eternity in mind. And I argue that an omniscient God possessing middle knowledge would be in a position to know. So everything that we don't like about this world, including the fact that animals experience pain, might be, for all we know, the best of all, or the best feasible it might be part of the best feasible world God could create. Indeed, for Alex himself, it could be the case that, like you said, Alex seems to be, would it be fair to say that he seems to be moving toward Christianity, even though he's still an atheist? He's at least more friendly toward it?
Well, I think he's definitely moving more into the direction of Christianity in comparison to where he was at before.
Okay.
But I've exchanged a couple of personal emails with him, but I've never seen him face to face. But I'm definitely hoping that he is. And,
Right.
he has stated, I mean, I've had a couple of commenters under my video saying that they have heard Alex say that if this problem of animal suffering gets resolved for him, he might, he is a significant step closer to Christianity, if not like just in front of its door, So this is really big. And again, I believe, again, I really believe him to be a genuine and honest guy.
He seems like it.
Yes. And I mean, obviously this is, you may call this wishful thinking. I mean, I really do have the hope that he might, a couple of years down the road from now, he might become something like a new, I don't know, C.S. Lewis on YouTube kind of figure in the 21st century. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
man.
Because he is really, I do believe he's very serious. And yeah.
Well, okay. So let's do a little thought experiment here. So let's suppose that Alex does see that Christianity is probably true. That, and what I say, mere Christianity, that God exists and raised Jesus from the dead, that's probably true. The evidence is good enough to justify putting your faith and trust in God and in the person of Jesus. So let's suppose that happens. Now, for Alex himself, it could be the case that when Alex dies, then finds himself, opens his eyes on the other side of death and finds himself looking into the eyes of Jesus, who loves him more than he can imagine, and finds himself in heaven. It could be the case. It could be the fact that the animals in heaven who no longer experience pain and will never suffer again, maybe that's what it will take for him to keep him from taking a perfect state of affairs in the presence of an unhidden God for granted, unlike Adam, Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels, right? So he doesn't like the fact, Alex doesn't like the fact that these animals are suffering here. And like you said, it's not a lot of suffering. It's a little bit of suffering. But even if there's just a little bit of suffering, he doesn't like that. I don't like it either. But an omniscient God with middle knowledge knows what Alex needs to not take heaven for granted, unlike Adam, Eve, Satan. Maybe it's the fact that these same animals who experience some suffering on earth are never going to experience suffering again. And maybe Alex will just love that so much, he would never wreck it. He would never rebel, unlike Satan did. Even though I would say that Alex still has the ability and the opportunity to do the same thing that Satan did and a third of all the angels, but he never would, because he's learned from the suffering the suffering infused world, right? And now when he finds himself in a state of affairs where suffering is only a memory, he would never take that for granted. And so that's why I think 2 Corinthians 4:17, that's what Paul's talking about. It prepares us for eternity, is what he says. So an omniscient God with middle knowledge would be in a position to know if this is true or false about Alex. And if it's true, then it would be worth it to have animals suffer in the same world in which God himself was willing to take on nerve endings and suffer himself. So anyway, it could be the case that this kind of animal suffering is actually beneficial to Alex and many other humans that God loves more than the entire universe. So I don't know. There's just some things I've been thinking about. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I love that perspective, Tim. That it would be great to have Alex as part of the conversation, actually.
I know.
So here's two more things. I mean, Alex does explicitly say that even if God exists, some level of suffering can be expected. So he is not, a defender of the logical problem of evil. He, admits that even if God exists, some level of suffering will still be there. That's fair. That's plausible to him. So his problem is, it's the evidential problem of evil. He says there's just far too much animal suffering. What I'm going to argue in my second response to Alex's case, like biggest case against Christianity from animal suffering, is this. Alex's meta-ethics is very utilitarian in its look. It's based on the idea that human beings, in fact, all sentient creatures, as Alex says, ultimately determined to desire the maximization of pleasure. This is the key foundation of his ethical framework. Now, desiring the maximization of pleasure only makes sense as the description of the state of human beings and animals if we're not in a state of constant pain. Because if you're in a state of constant pain, then what you will ultimately desire is the alleviation of that pain rather than the maximization of pleasure. As an example, a person who starves will, desire to get anything to eat, really, just in order to, get rid of the feeling of hunger or of the pain of hunger. They will not desire, or at least not primarily desire. They will not primarily desire to get the most delicious meal ever. And so it does not make sense. And the other thing is also, some people would say that, avoiding pain and desiring pleasure are simply two sides of one and the same coin. But that is not quite relevant, because Alex's meta-ethics is not based on the idea that we desire pleasure, but that we desire the maximization of pleasure. Okay, there's a big difference there. And it is not plausible to suggest that the desire for maximization of pleasure is the same thing as the desire for the avoidance of pain. Because again, like a starving person, desiring the avoidance of the feeling of hunger is, that's a qualitatively different thing than a person desiring the most delicious meal ever.
Right.
So, and yet here is the rub. Alex, in his biggest case against Christianity, states that pain is exactly the state sentient creatures are in constantly. Again, animals are endlessly tormented, as he says. They are defined by pain. He says that human beings, in that very same case, he says that suffering is omnipresent in the life of each person. He says that, you watch YouTube videos just to avoid suffering. You eat to avoid suffering. You sleep to avoid fatigue. So he redefines, so to speak, our experience in order to say that we're actually in constant pain and suffering, both the animals and humans. But if this is the case, if Alex wants to make this case in order to fire his biggest shot against Christianity, he cannot also claim that we're ultimately driven by the desire for pleasure. Because if we're ultimately driven by the desire for pleasure, this can only be so if we're not constantly experiencing suffering. Because if we were constantly experiencing suffering, as he says in his case against, from animal suffering, then we would be desiring the alleviation of suffering rather than the maximization of pain. And the two things, they're simply not the same thing. So my case, the case I'm going to build is this. In order, either Alex can, launch his biggest attack against Christianity with his case from animal suffering, but this means that he has to, drop his entire meta-ethical theory, which is based on the desire for the maximization of pleasure. Or the other option he has is that and I think this is the more reasonable option, is to keep his, the basis of his meta-ethics, the maximization of pleasure as the ultimate desire guiding sentient creatures. But this would mean that he has to modify his biggest case against Christianity and allow or admit that sentient existence is not as traumatic and not as painful as he described it to be. So that's going to be my second response. Yeah.
Well, I've only lived for 48 years. My birthday was yesterday. And I definitely have experienced some horrible pain and suffering.
That's right.
But man, the percentage of my life that I feel is avoided pain and suffering is quite enormous. I think I love life. And even when I'm in 2019 was a tough year for me. I experienced probably some of the worst pain I've ever gone through in several different manners. But I had surgery on my knee. I had horrible staph infection. It hurt so bad. I was out for weeks and kind of really slowed down for months. But it was during that time where I grew physically stronger in other areas. And I grew mentally and spiritually stronger during those times too. Indeed, I think Paul's right. These light momentary afflictions do prepare us. They make us stronger. Really, Paul was onto something way before whoever else said no pain, no gain. Paul was actually talking about that a couple thousand years ago. Yeah. but yeah, I think we can even consider the idea that might even be true for animals. And I'd like to think that it is, and I don't think it's incompatible with Christianity. In fact, all the way back in 2016, I think I published an article called "What About Babies Who Die?" It's kind of a controversial article, I had to tell you the truth, but you know, and here I'm going to open that up here. I'll just read a footnote. Here it is. I said, here's the footnote. It's interesting to note that if this is a possibility for toddlers who die unaware of the existence of God and the gospel message, it also seems that the same speculative move could be applied to animals who seem to be in similar cognitive states as human toddlers. If this is the case, then we have a potential theodicy which can be applied when dealing with the problem of animal pain. Not only do I see this as a legitimate possibility as an animal lover, I sure hope it's true. So you know, it's I've been thinking about this for a little bit. And, you know, this was probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was in Miami doing some missions work there, and I was leading some Bible studies with little kids. And this little girl, I'll never forget her. She raised her hand and asked me why. Little girl asking a big question. She was asking me why animals had to be in pain. So she was dealing with the problem of animal pain. As a little elementary girl. And my response to her at the time, I'd never really thought about this at the time, but I asked her 4 questions. And in fact, I wrote an article on my website, freethinkingministries.com, called "A Thought Experiment versus Unjustified Evil and Suffering." So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to read these 4 questions. So I start out, and I'll say question 1. Well, let's see. Let me back up. All right. So I say, suppose you awoke tomorrow in a state of affairs in which all suffering had ceased. Not only are you no longer experiencing suffering of any kind, but you became aware that all suffering had come to an end. There was no more suffering resulting from moral or natural evil, or even what seems to be gratuitous animal suffering. All of that was nothing but a memory. Now, is there any reason to think that it would stay that way? In order to answer that question, take a short quiz. And so these are the 4 questions that I asked. Question number 1, would you take this suffering-free world for granted, or would you enjoy it? Would you say, so what, no big deal? Or would you exclaim, this is the way things ought to be? So I say, would you answer A, yes, I would savor this suffering-free state of affairs, or B, no, I would take this suffering-free state of affairs for granted? I think Alex would answer A, that he would savor this suffering-free state of affairs. And then I say, next, suppose that you discovered that this new suffering-free state of affairs depends upon you, right? It's up to you, as well as everyone else in that suffering-free state, to keep suffering of all kinds out of this world. Question 2, would you do everything within your power to ensure that no sentient being ever experienced suffering again? A, yes, I would do everything in my power to ensure that no being capable of suffering ever suffers again. Or B, no, I would not try to keep this world free from suffering. Again, I can only speculate, but I think Alex would answer A in the affirmative. Yeah. Now, suppose that you realize that all you had to do to ensure that this world would remain uninfected from any affliction or suffering ever again was merely to follow a few simple rules. Right? If you strove to follow these rules daily, then you would ensure that sentient life, including you, flourished into the infinite future, with each day seemingly getting better than the previous day. Question 3, would you do your best? Would you make a commitment to live according to these few simple rules every day into infinity and beyond, as Buzz Lightyear would say. Answers. A, yes, I would do my best to follow these simple rules to make sure no one, including myself, ever suffers again. And that would include all the animals.
Mm-hmm.
Or B, no, I will not commit to live according to anybody's rules. All right, well, next, let's suppose you discover that the rules that you needed to follow were exactly the rules known as the law of Christ, according to John 14:15 in the New Testament. All right, question number 4. Would you freely choose to commit to following the commands of Jesus? Or would you say, no thanks, I'd rather live according to my own set of rules, even if all kinds of suffering comes flooding back into this state of affairs? A, yes, I would gladly commit to following the commands of Christ into the infinite future for all eternity. Or B, no, I would never live according to those stupid commands. I finish by saying, if you answered in the affirmative to all the above, then congratulations. You have learned from pain, evil, and suffering, even the pain, evil, and suffering that impacts others, including animals, right? And now you've chosen wisely. As the Apostle Paul makes clear in 2 Corinthians 4:17, I'll say it again, these light momentary afflictions, suffering resulting from moral, natural, and even the awareness of gratuitous evils, even animal pain and suffering, have prepared you for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. You've learned how things ought to be, and also learned how stupid it is not to strive to follow the rules given to us from God. If that's the case, then you are ready and prepared for heaven. You're prepared for eternity, as Paul said. So on the other side of the coin, if you answered in the negative to any of the above, then you're still learning, and you need to experience more suffering yourself, or need to be aware of much more suffering of others in the current state of affairs suffused with evil. Now, that's the best case scenario. Or perhaps you've made a commitment not to learn from suffering. Well, that's cool. It's sad, but it's cool. God lets you have it your way into the infinite future. You simply won't be allowed to hang out with those of us who have learned how stupid it is not to follow the law of Christ and to love God first and all people as ourselves, according to Matthew 5:44 and 22:37 through 39. And I would add, learning how to love God's creation and even animals as well. So this thought experiment demonstrates that God allowing suffering, including what seems to be gratuitous evils, is justified and perfectly loving, because we can learn from all kinds of suffering. That is to say, when we keep eternity in mind, these light momentary afflictions, as Paul describes them, make perfect sense. So anyway, I actually provide a syllogism with this in mind in my book. I'm not going to share that now. I'll let people get my book and read it. It's in the last chapter. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that kind of a theodicy, I guess?
Yeah, like I love that. I mean, correct me if I am wrong, but again, this seems to, your point here seems to be, far beyond just trying to offer, a philosophically solid theodicy, but you're really, getting to the heart of the issue, which is human pride. It's
right. Okay, so you cut out on me a little bit. What did you say the issue was?
The issue is not so. I guess, I love the thought experiment, and I'm seeing the syllogism here in front of me. I love it, but I guess what I love about it is that it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you're not just trying to offer, a philosophically solid and theologically solid theodicy, but you're really trying to get to what is the personal sticking point, which is human pride. It's what makes people reject God. That's at least what Scripture tells us anyway, is that it's not the evidence. Like, no one will stand in front of God and say, well, God, I didn't have enough evidence. It's ultimately, pride, even in the face of what is, evidence that is as clear as anything could be. I love that. Cool. I love that about it. Yeah.
Thank you. So bottom line, we've got multiple things that need to be thought about here. You've offered several points. Let's think through them. Number one, animal life is not defined by suffering. They're
Yeah.
happy most of the time, and you've backed that up with scholarship and people with PhDs in the field. What else would you add to that? That's a big one.
Yeah, even more basic than that, I would challenge Alex and say that, you need to be more nuanced and balanced in your description of reality. It's not, legit to build a case that depends on, a depiction of reality that doesn't quite, represent the way things really are. So then again, I make the case from evolution, saying that evolution seems to suggest that animals are happy because happy animals are more prone to survive. They have a better chance in the struggle for survival. And I go on to say that there seems to be, again, a scientific debate discussion happening, which around the question, again, in my case, or the case I'm building specifically from invertebrate animals, which make up 95% of the animal kingdom. And I'm saying that given that there is a big question mark about whether these animals can actually experience pain, like no one is warranted to make as confident of a case as Alex does. So let's, be, more cautious in how we phrase and frame things. And then the fourth point I raise, again, and this is forthcoming, is that if Alex's meta-ethics is, supposed to hold water with its emphasis on our desire for the maximization of pleasure, or indeed all sentient creatures' desire for the maximization of pleasure, then we cannot at the same time accept his case for, like, against Christianity, which, tells us that everyone and every sentient being is constantly suffering. Because if that's the case, then we cannot also desire the maximization of pleasure. Yeah.
So we got all of that. I mean, you built a nice a cake, I guess, and I just put on a little bit of frosting on the top and say, but even if all of that falls apart, well, this works with 2 Corinthians 4:17, and this is preparing humans and maybe even animals too. I won't rule that out for eternity. So if that's the case, then I don't think this should be keeping Alex from Christ. This is a stumbling block that I think we've been able to move for him, and I hope that he does consider Christianity. There is a way things ought to be, and I refer to that as heaven. Whenever we experience things in this world that we don't like, and we say this is not the way things ought to be, we're presupposing a perfect state of affairs. We're presupposing heaven. And community with each other, with animals. It's really kind of like Narnia, right? and we are presupposing heaven in the presence of an unhidden God. Whenever somebody complains about the hiddenness of God, they're really saying that it shouldn't be like that. I agree, right? But we wrecked it. We had wrecked that, and so now God's given us a world with pain, evil, and suffering, and even some hiddenness on his part, so that we will learn from this. We will learn how things ought to be, so that we don't take that for granted when we find ourselves in the state of affairs in which things ought to be, in a perfect state of affairs. So anyway,
that's right. I love that.
Cool. Well, Lukas, I love your work, man. Keep it up. I want to encourage anybody that's watching this right now, make sure you go over to Lukas's YouTube channel. It's called Deflate, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Just search Deflate, DEFLATE, and they'll find it. Go subscribe to him right now and hit that bell so you get notifications and share his videos. So
that's good.
Lukas, let's do this again soon, okay?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. That was an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed that. Thanks for having me.
I was honored. Thank you very much. Hey, if you found this video helpful, please like it, please share it, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Freethinking Ministries. Thanks a lot. Stay reasonable. See you next time.